So I'll be talking about, of course, my book, but I'm really interested in talking about today some strategies that help take energy away from depression. We're going to come to that. I was thinking when I tried to compose the talk, I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes and then we'll do 15 minutes of questions and answers, is that this book took me 23 years to write, on and off. It was a long process, and I think, how do I condense that into 45 minutes? And so I don't, of course. So I'm just going to try to go a little bit deeper, and the broad thing as well. And obviously in the book I try to go with more information about the specifics. Okay. So what I want to do is set it up. I'm going to start by what is a severe depression. And the reason I want to set it up is the word depression, there's a problem with it. It's used for all sorts of things. When the Tar Heels got knocked out a week and a half ago, I was, quote, depressed. And then I felt better after Duke loss. I have a feeling that some people had the opposite experience here. And yet that's not depression. Those are temporary mood states of sadness. A severe depression is an intense syndrome that combines psychological, cognitive, and behavioral elements. And it engulfs a person's life. And in many ways, I think of it like a severe cancer. It tries to kill them. I wish ultimately there was a different word than the word depression. Maybe one day they'll rename it as something else. Because anybody who's ever wrestled with one knows just how horrible it can be. So the key element is that it's not temporary. It's often a chronic experience where it just completely overwhelms a person. As a clinician, what I'm looking for when diagnosing it is, does their depression impair their functioning? It's one thing to say, oh yes, I have screwed up sleep, or oh yes, I'm having trouble concentrating. But the real issue is, are they having trouble functioning in their life? Can they barely make it to work? Are they withdrawing from their relationships? Are they barely functioning? And that's what you're looking for as a clinician to diagnose a severe depression. So it's the classic symptoms that we'd be looking for: loss of interest, lack of energy, almost like you're having to drag yourself through molasses, difficulty concentrating, which makes the irony of writing a book about depression, part of what goes into trying to write a self-help book about the specific thing, when you know your target audience can barely hang on, and they probably can do maybe one paragraph at a time. For men in particular, they're going to have a lot of irritability often, which often erupts into rage, anger. Men often, what we use the word somaticize their emotions, which means that they're going to take their emotions and feel them in their body. Many depressed men will talk about they feel a heaviness in their shoulders. Their GI system is all screwed up. They're either losing weight or gaining weight. They're often, the classic symptom is backaches. They say, and they'll be going to their regular internist and saying, my back hurts. And just, I don't feel well, but my back hurts. But we're really looking at it as a syndrome of depression, a severe depression. So when we put all these symptoms together is how we end up with the syndrome. That's just a brief overview. The real issue, the reason I'm discussing that is I want my patients to learn to respect their depression. And that sounds sort of crazy because the person is doing everything they can to not be depressed. But the same way is if I go to my doctor and he says, Jonas, you have high blood pressure. If I walk out of that office and say, it's no big deal, right? It's just, I don't have to worry about it. Then of course I'm setting myself up for a devastating stroke. But if somebody recognizes, if I say you have a really severe, you have very intense depression going on, and they say, gosh, what can I do about this? And then they're setting themselves up for success. The way I try to do this with my severely depressed clients is I try to get them to separate themselves out from their depression. And that is, as simple as that sounds, it's often very difficult for someone who's wrestled with their mood for a long time, because they will basically say, this is just who I am. I'm just down. Life is hard for me. This is just how it is. And so a lot of the work I'm doing is to say, this is you, and this is your depression. To make that point more obvious, I have something that I call the beast. This is the beast of depression. What I really want, he's sort of cute, is what I really want my patients to do. This guy doesn't live in the office because he's too damn big. I used to have a little gorilla, but this is what we were doing for some videos we made, is I want a person to say, okay, this is me and this is my depression. Then I want them to name their beast. There's famous people from Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, they would call their beast the black dog. I've had patients call it the Effets. Whatever you name, but name your own beast. It's really important. It helps you separate yourself out from the syndrome. So this is the beast. The nature of the beast is really the crux. The only thing your depression wants to do, your severe depression wants to do, is to get stronger. And that doesn't really make sense, because it starts out like this. You encounter stress in your life, and your severe depression, the way I think of it, as it's going through your life with you. And it's basically watching everything you do. Right now, my own depression is watching me give this talk. And it's whispering in my ear as I say this very talk, I'm screwing up. Or it's critical when I stumble my words or I talk too fast. Because what it's trying to do is it's trying at this very moment to become the big beast. The only thing your depression wants to do is to get bigger. The way it's going to do that is it's waiting for you to encounter stress, and then it's going to whisper in your ear, you need an escape. You need to blow off some steam. This is the classic, I need to go get a beer. I need to go, all of us have our own various escape behaviors that give us temporary relief, but always resort in us ultimately feeling worse. And this is the syndrome that maintains and energizes the beast of your own severe depression. A classic way, so it's basically trying to get you to trick you into engaging in these escape behaviors. The classic number one thing for most people, not everybody in this room, but for most people would be alcohol. And when you drink alcohol, which is a depressant compound, this is my graphic, it's like pouring gasoline into your beast. I know that sounds sort of hyperbole, right? You're thinking, oh, a cold beer on a hot day, that doesn't cause severe depression. It does not. But when your brain is wrestling with that tremendous stress and you can barely cope, you're barely functioning, it's almost as if you have a gash, this is a metaphor, in your brain, and it'd be like pouring sulfuric acid into the wound. So the number one thing that your beast will drive you to do, alcohol. Now, alcohol is actually not my thing. I have some that doesn't actually call me. I have other ways that I personally like to escape. For me, it would be media. And it's, for example, when I'm down, I'd want to watch, used to watch TV now on the computer, and it's not just for a couple hours. It'd be like for hour upon hour upon hour. And afterwards, of course, I feel more shitty. And I know the same process happens in everybody else. And then we're also looking at pot, which is the second most common substance that people are trying to do to obviously medicate their mood. The problem with pot is that it doesn't work good enough. That's the other way of thinking about it. I've had plenty of people come to me and say, I smoke on the weekends, it's just not a big deal. But I've also had plenty of people who come and say, I'm smoking every day, and yet they're in a horrible depression. And so I'd sit there thinking, why doesn't this stuff work better to help them? Because alcohol and pot, as well as sitting there endlessly watching TV, or now any screen, as well as also, like a fourth classic would be stuffing yourself full of sugars and saturated fats, is they deplete the essential chemicals that regulate our mood, the essential neurotransmitters. These are serotonin, dopamine, and there's a few others. So when we're pouring this stuff into our stressed out brain, we are depleting serotonin. It's that simple. It's not actually, they use the word down-regulating. And so think of it, I'm trying to feel better, right? And I need these neurochemicals to help balance my mood, and yet I'm flooding my system, my brain, with stuff that it basically turns them off. So then, of course, I have the rebound, which is, the classic hangover. As a clinician, it doesn't actually surprise me why on Mondays or Tuesdays, my patients, the ones who wrestle with depression, come in and they say they feel awful. And all their problems they're working with, they feel much more hopeless. And then I say, how was the weekend for you? You say, I drank too much, or I smoked too much. And the drinking often starts on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And so they're really washed out. And it's almost like the brain needs to rebuild, if it can, the neurochemicals involved in feeling better. So that's just a brief overview of that. The way I think of it is, the problems you have made you severely stressed. But what has made you severely depressed is the way you respond to the stress. So I want to say that again. The problems we all have made us stressed. but it's how we respond to the stress that turn it into a severe depression and that maintains it. So that's just a brief overview of what gives energy to the beast. And I'd like people to think about what, ideally, what gives energy to one's own beast. Even if you don't wrestle with depression, you think about, when do you feel worse? When do you feel most crappy? What gives energy to that side of yourself? And it's really interesting to think about, gosh, when I do this or I do that, and trying to identify the specific behaviors that give energy to it. But now we're going to come to really talk about the even much more important is what takes energy away from the beast, right? So we have this syndrome. The other metaphor that I like to think about is hurricanes. Here in the South, of course, we're intimately acquainted with hurricanes, and we know that as the hurricanes either come across or go up the Caribbean, they get stronger when they go over warm water. In order for them to become a Category 1 to a Category 4 or 5, they have to be over warm water. That gives energy to the syndrome of a hurricane. The same thing with the beast. It needs you, the person, to engage in certain things to give it energy. There are things you can do that can over time, even right in the beginning, then over time, take energy away from your own, I'm mixing metaphors, but inner hurricane or inner beast. And I just want to make that clear. The most direct way to take energy away from your beast is through exercise. Exercise just means aerobic activity of your heart. I'm not talking about going to the gym and becoming or running a marathon or doing something crazy. I'm talking fast walking, anything to get your heart rate up a little more than normal. And they have shown that exercising as little as 2 hours a week, that's 4 30-minute times, even less, what it does is it basically activates a third of your genes. So all of us here have approximately 20,000 genes in our body, but about a third of them are not necessarily, they may not be turned on or expressed, as they use this word, gene expression. When we move our body consistently for about a few, they're not really clear, but it looks like as quick as 3 to 4 weeks, we actually activate a third of our genetic makeup. These same genes are involved with our mood regulation. That's why people talk about, I'm going to the gym, I feel better. They've literally turned on these gene set. And the only reason I'm saying this is that if you need another reason to actually go for a fast walk, there it is. But these genes are also turned off. When I'm in a state of feeling horrible and I've stopped working out and weeks go by, last thing I want to do is, I don't want to do anything. What I'm not saying is that these genes have literally shut off my brain. So that feeling I just don't have motivation, I don't want to go, it's a genetic thing. It's really weird to think about. We're literally turning our own genes on and off by what we do. And that's why I think it's so interesting when people say about their mood, oh, I just inherited depression. Well, truth, that's all BS. Because if they actually started moving their body more, they would actually change some of their genetic expression. It's fascinating to think about how we actually can transform ourselves regardless of what we've inherited. Okay. From my own thing is I call it slow running. And the reason I want to talk about this for a second is for a lot of people don't work out because we have the image of us working out as what we had to do in junior high, which was always humiliating and made us feel bad. And they ruined it for us. Or some people served in the military where they were, you're forced to do hikes, you're forced to do runs, and it took away all the joy of it. So what I realized for myself is that I came up with something I call the art of slow running. And I try to run basically each year slower than I do the year before, and I succeed. Is that some people here will attest, such as my wife, who won't go with me anymore because I run too slowly for her. But the issue that I was trying to go against was, we all have that famous phrase that's in every gym, no pain, no gain. That's all BS. That is the worst thing ever, because the only gain that is you happen chronically over time. And take the word slow running out. If there's not one person here who cannot keep up with me. I run very, very slowly. There's a man sitting in the corner back there who was running with me, and he walked the whole time, which was very humiliating. While he had a soda can in his hand. But the issue is that enough of that aerobic activity changes my mood. And like anyone else here, when you work out, and there's all sorts of, we're talking swimming, to anything that just gets your heart beating, for the next 5 or 6 hours, you're going to feel a little bit better. And that little bit is crucial to breaking the back of your depression. Now I want to move away from exercise for a second. I want to talk about what are called cognitive strategies. These are the way, basically thinking patterns. When you're in a severe depression, I call it the stinking breath of the beast, is that it floods your mind with certain distinct thinking styles that feed your syndrome of depression. These are classic cognitive behavioral therapy. Some people have heard that word. And the ones that depression loves to use, the first is called overgeneralization. This is where a person will take one small data bit, one small fact of their life, and blow it out of proportion. For example, last night I was at dinner with friends, and I got into a bit of an slash argument with one of my dearest friends. And then as I was, all night I was thinking, oh, I was just really angry at her, and it's not going well, this is that. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a second, I've known this person for 30 years, we care for each other, is a really good friend, I'm blowing it out of proportion. And I do it, and I know everybody I've ever talked to as a patient does it also. And so what we need to do, and what I try to teach my patients, is how to identify when your mind is overgeneralizing. Is what you want to do, and this is very specific, is you take a piece of paper. On the piece of paper, you put a line down the middle, line down the middle, and on this side, the right side, you write down the facts that support the statement, such as, my friend doesn't like me, right? And you write down those things. And on this side, the other side, on the other side of the line, you write down those facts that don't support that statement. And I would write down, well, actually, we've been friends forever, sometimes we argue, it was a stressful situation, that kind of thing. And then you'll be able to look at this and realize, oh, wait, I'm blowing this whole thing out of proportion. The reason, there's actually apps you can do this with. You can buy these apps on the phone. I don't like those apps. I think they're all shit, excuse me. Because I think there's actually something crucial about writing something down. I literally think it changes the neurochemistry in your brain. You take and I have in my office, it's a classic, yellow notepad, and you just make a line and you write it down. It's something that it slows the brain down. It probably engages the prefrontal cortex more, which slows down different parts of your brain. It's a wonderful thing to try. You write down basically positive information about yourself. The more specific you can make it, the better. Such as, well, we got together for dinner. That's a specific thing. We were engaged with each other. That was a specific thing, right? As opposed, and you're always trying to challenge your mind by going as specific as possible. The next classic cognitive distortion is called catastrophizing. We all know what that is, right? I sneeze, therefore I tell myself I've got the flu. I actually didn't get the flu shot this year, which is true. That means I'm going to be one of those people that you read about in WRAL that are going to die, right? And this will keep me up at night, right? I see patients all day. Thank God I've actually been healthy. No, I didn't get a shot, sorry. But this is a classic thing your beast will do. So it's flooding your mind with this fog of depressive thinking, overgeneralization, catastrophizing. Again, how would you challenge catastrophizing? Piece of paper, line down the middle, data that supports the statement, I'm going to die, now that I sneeze, data that refutes the statement on the other side. Make sense? Right? And I know it sounds so simplistic, but this actually is what works. You don't have to see a shrink. You don't have to overthink this. It's very simple. That's why it's actually so powerful. This is free, right? This kind of stuff. And so it's fascinating. It works on me, even though I teach it sometimes. It works on all of us. The other classic cognitive distortion is called black and white thinking, or all and nothing thinking. Therefore, that something is or something isn't. The problem with all or nothing thinking is it leaves out all the data in the middle, all the other possible scenarios of something that happened, and it just focuses on, oh my God, or it's fine. And this is something we have to force our brain to remember. Am I doing all or nothing thinking? If you do it in any situation. Here's a classic one. I'm late to work. It takes me about 25 minutes to get from Chatham County to my office in Durham, and I'm really angry at myself because I hate being late. Of course, like anyone else, you're driving 1551 and every light was red. Right? This always happens to me, right? And then And that subtle statement, it always happens to me. That subtle statement is all or nothing thinking. It doesn't always happen to me. Most of the time, it's like anyone else. The light flows, the traffic goes. I mean, sometimes every now and then you just hit a whole string of green lights, but you have to actively challenge your brain to ask, what are you saying to yourself at that moment? And ideally, of course, I'm driving, so I'm not going to have a pad and paper, but this is how you would challenge it. So there's other distortions, but these are the three big ones. So we've got overgeneralization, catastrophizing, and black and white thinking. Why is the beast doing this? Because it knows the more it gets me to think in a distorted manner, the more it gets me to focus basically on negative data points, the worse I will feel. It's very hard that when a person is in a place of stress and depression, to actually remember positive things. And this is where it's almost like an exercise we have to do to get our brain to pull back. There's even research on why it does that. It's not totally clear. It's almost like we store positive things in one place and negative things in another. We have to force our brain to say, oh, am I not thinking about anything positive? And that's the phrase I actually use for myself. Am I not thinking about anything positive? And that's, oh, well, wait a second. And that helps. And very quickly, the mood starts to change a little bit. And that's what we're trying to do there. The number one behavioral strategy that your depression will do to increase in strength is called avoidance. Avoidance means it wants you to avoid a task that you think you need to get done. This is not a task somebody else told you that you're not doing. That's procrastinating. Procrastinating is when you're not doing somebody else's agenda. But when you're not doing your agenda, and you're engaging in avoidance, the more you avoid, the more energy your beast will get. Why we all know, for example, taxes, right? This weekend, you're all here, obviously got your taxes done. I got mine done way ahead of time as of 2 days ago. So, but that avoidance leads to an increase in stress, right? Now, I'm one of the great people. If you look up the word avoidance, you're going to see me. There was years ago in my office, I saw this man who was in a terrible depression. He was older, and his depression was all wrapped up in one thing. He had retired from being a successful business guy, executive. At his home, he had a big desk, and he told me his desk was covered with junk. That was symbolizing to him how his life has fallen apart. He was avoiding cleaning up his desk. I can't, there's too many papers everywhere, he couldn't do it. That avoidance of that task that he set for himself generated all these thoughts about he's a lousy person. He comes in one day and he says things are getting better. We had talked about this, but apparently he went to, this is when he saw at Sears, right? That dates me. And he bought an egg timer. It was a 5-minute egg timer. And he would use the egg timer for 4 minutes and 57 seconds. And I said, well, why not 5 minutes? He said, the thought of doing something for 5 minutes was overwhelming, but he knew he could do it for 4 minutes and 57 seconds. And he would set the egg timer, and he would have to clean his desk. Whatever he can get done. Then he would stop for 4 minutes and 57 seconds. And this was so fascinating to me. He forced himself to stop, and then he made a decision. Do I want to continue? Okay, I do want to do it. So he would do another segment. And lo and behold, he gets the desk cleaned up. And then I didn't make this up. Then he would come in and talk about, he did it for 4 minutes. He was avoiding talking to his ex-wife. He said, okay, he could do it 4 minutes and 57 seconds. He was avoiding going to an AA meetings. And he said, I could sit in the back quietly for 4 minutes and 57 seconds, which he did. And so this issue about how do we break avoidance, think about anything you're avoiding at this moment, the task that you want to do. And it could be mowing the dandelions outside on your lawn, anything you have. We all avoid things. Imagine if we would just use your iPhones now, but you told yourself, I'm going to do it 4 minutes, 57 seconds. If you do this, you have to promise yourself you're going to stop. You're not allowed to go more than that. The reason for that is, if you don't promise yourself you're going to stop, your beast is actually going to whisper in you, don't do it anyway. It's just too much. If you do it, you stop, and then you sit there. You say, okay, you twiddle your thumbs for, again, 4 minutes and 57 seconds and decide whether or not you want to do another segment. I know it sounds crazy. It's like, this doesn't make sense, but it does. It actually works. If you do 2 or 3 systems, you won't finish your task, but you sure as hell will get started on it. And it's actually a really cute little way to overcome, and in many ways to overcome these feelings like I can't move, I can't do anything, or very simple behavioral changes. Okay, now I want to jump into actually something that really I do like talking about. In particular, the hallmark of a depression, a severe depression, is isolation. The individual, though they may be relating to others, and they may have 1,000 friends on Facebook, inside, when you talk to them, they feel terribly isolated. They feel very alone. Loneliness is the classic emotion you're looking at when you're seeing somebody who's depressed. They feel cut off. There's two interpersonal skills that I try to teach my patients that vastly increase your connection to other people. The first is this is an old skill from the 60s, they're called the active listening. And so the key, we've all heard the term active listening, but when you you engage in active listening to another human being, your beast loses significant energy. You literally, as the listener, are changing the neurochemistry in your brain. When the other person feels connected to you because they feel like you were deeply listening to them, there's more oxytocin created. You feel better. All right, so how do you do active listening? The key to active listening is keep your mouth shut. If you have a tendency to break in, like I do, here's a little trick. Take the inside of your gums and suck them forward between your teeth. And if you break in their conversation, that means you're not biting down hard enough. Bite down so hard that it hurts. The goal here is to say to someone, you're talking to someone, and let's say they're venting, they had a rough day for your partner or your friend. And you say, so tell me what's going on. And they start talking, blah, 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 blah. You need just to listen. After about 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, they'll stop. The goal here is just to repeat back to them the emotion they said they were feeling. Do not solve their problem. As men, these are vast generalizations, but as men, we're often socialized to solve problems, to fix. When we jump in and offer advice or fix, what that communicates to the other is we were not listening to them. They feel invalidated. For example, if my spouse comes home and says that the traffic was all screwed up south of Carborough, and they were doing this construction, and she couldn't get through, and it was just awful. If I jump in and say, if you had just gone down to 54 and gone left, the problem with that is it's clever, and the advice is good. She won't feel like I listened to her. So when I work with people, I say, and you have advice, hold on to the advice. It's worthwhile, but for the first part, just listen to their emotion. And the emotion is whatever they said. I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling angry, sad, the classic emotions. And then what you say back to them, it sounds like you're feeling pretty stressed. And that's it. That's all you have to do. So this is the first part of active listening. I know it sounds so simple, but I think of it like a yoga practice. People talk about a practice you do every day. Listening is one of the great skills of life. I get paid for it, it is the way to deepen any kind of connection you're in, romantic, friendship, platonic. It doesn't matter. It will make you make the person who feels like you're listening so much more connected to you. The second thing in interpersonal skills is active speaking. This is in the 60s. You used to call this assertive speaking. The key to active speaking rests on two basic laws of psychology that I've renamed. The first I call Psychology 101. That is that you have absolutely no power to change anybody else in the world. And think about that. Right? So here I'm a shrink, supposed to change people. I have no power. I have no power. I can't change anybody in this audience, including the people I'm related to, friends. I can't change anybody. And I forget this law, right? But it's like, we just don't. Nobody can change me, not really. I'm going to do pretty much exactly what I want to do, and so are each of you all. But then you start thinking, God, that's really depressing. But then we come to the first rule of psychotherapy, which I like to call the prime directive. We do have power to change small bits of our own behavior, including what we say, including what comes out of our mouth. It's crucial to remember that. You have the power to change a few things about what you choose to say or don't say. So when it comes to assertive speaking, the goal here is that when I'm working with men, often they'll talk about they don't feel respected or cared or loved for or heard. What I try to work with them is we use this word operationalize respect What does it mean when your boss doesn't respect you in terms of behavior? I'm almost like a playwright. I'm describing, show me like a playwright exactly how your boss shows you he doesn't respect you. He doesn't come over to my cubicle and say hello in the morning. Comes to everybody else's, doesn't come over to mine, doesn't respect me, right? My wife doesn't put away the dishes. She doesn't respect me, or my kid or whatever. Therefore, they don't respect me. But the behavior is the walking over to the cubicle. The behavior is whether or not they did the dishes. So we've operationalized the word into a set of behaviors. The goal here is now to get the individual, the client or the person at this moment, to directly ask for what they would like. I underline the word would. Would is a conditional verb. It's not a demand. And so now the goal here is you go up directly to the person, for example, the boss, and you would ask them, I would like you in the morning to come and check with me at my desk because it helps me set my day right. That's it. I would like for you to do the dishes on Tuesday morning. So it's not a question about love, it's not a question about respect, it's simply a very behavioral task. But this is how we operate. If somebody shows us they're actually following through these behaviors, we feel differently. People often are hesitant, myself included at times, to ask people directly for what they would like. But I see again and again, especially when you're working with depressed men or depressed women, the more they specifically ask for what they would like, the less helpless they feel. The reason they feel less helpless is because they no longer consider themselves someone who doesn't ask for what they want. They will then say to themselves, over time, I'm the kind of person, at least ask for it. I don't always get it, but I ask for it, and that takes energy away from that sense of lack of control, which is the hallmark of the beast. And this again is a practice. I've just condensed it down to 2 minutes, but this would be, and I like when people practice it very simple, please pass the salt. I would like for you to pass the salt. I would like for you to park your car differently. Whatever it is, a very specific behavioral task. Again, I do it as a conditional. I'm not making a character judgment about the other person. You just ask for what you want. I would like for you to buy me this piece of jewelry, whatever it is, right? And you feel differently, because people are not mind readers. They can't read your mind. Doesn't matter how long they've lived with you. And it doesn't matter that expression they always give you. You don't know what the heck they're thinking, because we're all thinking many, many things at the same moment. People here, they're listening to me. People hearing, they're thinking about what we're going to have for lunch. Whatever it is, the problems they have at home. This is how we are as human beings. But it's up to us to directly ask for what we would like from the other person. So that's assertive speaking. So between active listening and assertive speaking, the more we practice that, the more energy gets taken away from our beast. So we're going to do just one more, and then we're going to open to questions. We were talking about behavioral things, such as how changing what you're flooding your brain with. Then we were talking about cognitive things, the cognitive distortions. And then we were talking about interpersonal ways of being. And now we're going to talk about meaning, or they use this word ontology, ontological ideas, but this is how to find more meaning in your life. Most people, this is men or women, especially men, when they're wrestling with severe depression, feel like their life has no meaning. This is often why when you hear about why some people when they commit suicide, they feel like their life has no meaning. Now I, Jonas Horwitz, can't tell you how to have more meaning in your life, but I can tell you this. This to me is one of the essential questions of living, is to try to figure out what gives my life more meaning. And notice the way I rephrased it. What actions give my life more meaning? And this is the question I would have for each person here to ask themselves. What things do you do that give your life more meaning? So we're no longer dealing with the question as all or nothing. Is it meaningful or not meaningful? We're simply saying, gosh, if I do a book talk at Durham Library, I feel my life has a little bit more meaning today. That's really cool. And that would be whatever, a very specific thing. One of the things that really interests me, this is from Judaism, but it's part of all religions, is that we live in a broken world. And that expression means the world is, there's a lot of pain in the world. It's always been that way, and maybe lately there seems to be even more. And that's the global thought. The individual thought is, what can you do as an individual to help repair the world? There's 17,000 children are going to die today from hunger. There's climate change. There's all sorts of huge things. Those are horrible and real. The question in my mind is, can you ask yourself, what can you do in your own community to help make this community, so to speak, a little better? And that question, each person will figure out a million different ways. It's not just a question of helping somebody homeless. That's great. But somebody might be playing music. Somebody, it might be, I can't even answer it. Each person will find their own way. What can I do to protect my community? And it's not about carrying a gun. Is that the way to protect your community and yourself is by reaching out and trying to repair. And that does a much greater thing. I actually think that in the end, even as a psychologist, those behavioral things we were talking about earlier, and those cognitive strategies, they're great. I really believe in them. But that question, if you can figure that out, what gives your life more meaning, will take more energy away from your depression than anything else I've talked about. Anyone who says, this is why I do this, because it feels meaningful to me, they're not typically going to be in a state of depression, no matter what stress they're under. So that very much intrigues me. The final point that I want to wrap up with is do something every day. The number one thing I want my depressed patients to say to themselves is, what am I going to do today to take some energy away from my depression? Not tomorrow, not next week. What am I going to do today? And I'd love for people actually to write that down, put it on their bathroom mirror, and simply say to themselves, what is it I'm going to do today? I'm not going to cure it, but we're taking some, underline that word, energy away from our own depression. Thank you.